Welcome to my channel on the best of fantasy. Today I am reviewing Malice by Gwynne. This is book 1 of The Faithful and the Fallen. Now I'm going to start with a quick assessment. The pacing of this book is fast with vivid, strongly choreographed action sequences that really just flash by quite nicely. The characters really grew on me, and Malice feels like a great blend of old school fantasy and modern, with some nods perhaps to grimdark, including that fast pace. But I would not call it grimdark necessarily, because rather than all the moral grayness that you expect from grimdark, the characters feel more like familiar tropes that lean toward good and evil categories. Gwynne does an excellent job with these tropes, however, keeping them fresh enough to maintain my interest while delivering a strong story. Now, I have heard some people call The Faithful and the Fallen Viking-inspired. I love Vikings, and I can see where people might think Gwynne's books are inspired by them, since he is a Viking reenactor in his own life. And this is another reason why this author is so cool in my book. But The Faithful and the Fallen is not Viking-inspired. Yes, you heard me say it. It is not Viking-inspired so much as it is Celtic-inspired. As a fan of the Welsh Mabinogion and the various myths and legendary story cycles of Ireland, I love reading a Celtic-inspired fantasy. And Gwynne has done a marvelous job of drawing from old tales and modern fantasy alike. So many have described The Faithful and the Fallen as Viking-inspired that you might be a little skeptical of what I just said. But hear me out. I have studied both Old Norse, that's Viking language, and Welsh, the Celtic language of Wales, which is also called Cymraeg. And Wales, by the way, is called Cymru. That's what the people from Wales call their country, Cymru. One thing that hit me immediately is that the place names and the character names in Malice are predominantly Celtic in flavor, especially the Brythonic type of Celtic, meaning the branch of Celtic languages that Welsh belongs to. Names like Corbin and Dath and Nathair and Cohen, for example. Yes, I said Cohen. It would be pronounced Cohen in Welsh with a hard C, not Cywyn, as I'm sure probably a lot of people do pronounce it. I have no idea how Gwynne pronounces it, but in Welsh it would be Cohen. Even more telling is the fact that the title Seren Disglair, and you know the importance of that title if you've read the book, is actually straight up Welsh. And it means just what the story says it means, bright star. Seren means star in Welsh, and disglair means bright. So in Welsh, adjectives follow the nouns they describe, as in many other languages. So there is no doubt that Gwynne is using Welsh here. Incidentally, Gwynne itself is a Welsh name, though I don't know for certain whether or not John Gwynne identifies as Welsh, since family names can travel. The Goidelic or Gaelic type of Celtic, so think Irish or Manx, that sort of thing, is also evident in some of the place names and character names in Malice, such as Connell. And though I don't know Irish, the language spoken by the giants in the story feels very reminiscent of Irish, or some form of Gaelic at least. I love the Celtic flavor of the words in the story, but the influence extends well beyond language. In Celtic myth, for example, there are ancient objects with magical properties that play prominent roles in the old stories. In the tales of the Welsh Mabinogion, there is an ancient magical cauldron, the Pair Dadeni, or the Cauldron of Rebirth, that revives the dead when they're placed inside it. It plays an interesting role in a battle in the story, and some think it might have a relationship with legends of the Holy Grail. I haven't read the rest of The Faithful and the Fallen yet. I certainly will, but I haven't yet. So this is not a spoiler, but merely guesswork on my part. But there is a cauldron that appears in Malice that is clearly ancient and clearly magical and clearly important. And I don't know if it revives the dead or anything to do with death, but I have my suspicions. Now, Malice adds its own spin to the Celtic influences, of course, and there are other ingredients in the mix too. For example, there's the Jahar. It's ironic that these are the people who use the name Celtic-inspired when they seem the least Celtic, to me at least. And the name Jahar has an un-Celtic flavor since very few words in Welsh begin with a J, and the few words that are in Welsh that begin with a J tend to be borrowings from English. So sometimes authors just make things up. And yes, I'm sure you could find some hints of Vikings in there too. But after the Celtic influence, the next most obvious to me is the Roman. Now, nothing exactly like the Romans appears in Malice. However, one of these Celtic-inspired kingdoms does have a distinctly Roman flavor, and that would be Tenebral. You could see them as somewhat Romanized Celts. Just look at the names of characters from there, like Aquilus and Peritus. They also wear sandals and are described as being slightly more dark-featured than the people from the other kingdoms. Now, Tenebral has a sort of nominally imperial role from the past as well, and there may be a possible connection to future empire in the Banished Lands. This is me guessing because, again, I haven't read the rest of the books yet, but it goes beyond the names and the minor details. For example, the combat style of the majority of kingdoms is described as unmistakably Celtic, with individual warriors throwing themselves into the melee. An innovation in Tenebral, the more Roman-feeling kingdom, is of warriors interlocking their shields and wielding short swords, and this is distinctly like the Roman phalanx. I have no doubt that a reenactor like John Gwynne knows what he's about when he goes into such details, and the influences are again clear even as he creates vivid and interesting cultures from them. So, combining a great mix of influences and showing a strongly Celtic flavor, Malice is a fantastic start to The Faithful and the Fallen. It took me a couple hundred pages to feel fully immersed in the story and to start identifying with the characters. But by the end, with its relentless pace and action, the story swept me up. Some of the classical tropes of fantasy are there, and Gwynne handles them, I would say, very well with his own spin on them. For example, my guess is that we have both a chosen one and an anti-chosen one theme going on, although I'll have to see where the series goes. Again, that's my guess. And I most definitely care about the characters enough to be eager to find out what happens in the next installment. I am delighted to have read this Celtic-inspired fantasy. Celtic mythology is a goldmine of material waiting to be tapped by promising fantasy authors like Gwynne, joining the likes of Lloyd Alexander, one of my favorite authors from my childhood. Other than the Arthurian material, which was transformed from Celtic myth and legend to chivalrous tales of daring and romance after the Normans got a hold of them, the Celtic-inspired stories haven't received the recognition that I feel they deserve. One hopes that Gwynne's books might help stir some interest in the old tales like those in the Mabinogion. I'm truly looking forward to continuing my adventure in the Banished Lands as I eagerly read the rest of The Faithful and the Fallen. Thank you so much for listening to this video, and if you're interested in great fantasy, please consider liking and subscribing, and I hope you will join me for my next review. Until next time.